How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Crew First Culture podcast. This is Jeremy, and today I've got a special guest on with me, Mr. Kevin Housley. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, Kevin runs the Firefighter Craftsmanship website and social media. So, if you've seen some of his stuff, he's got a lot of great content out there. And he reached out to me a little while back and kind of started forming a little bit of a relationship and seeing how we could help each other and just kind of learn from each other. And so excited to have you on, Kevin, because you've got some topics here that we're going to go through that, like I said before we started recording, honestly, I've never really even heard of. So I'm looking forward to that. I love growing and learning, and so that's exciting for me. But before we get into that, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about kind of where firefighter craftsmanship came from and the purpose for it.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks again for having me. I'm psyched to be here and
You bet.
appreciate the hard work and all the great content you've been putting out. It's super helpful for the rest of us as well. So yeah, I'm Kevin. I'm a captain on an engine company, actually Engine 3. I like your hat right there.
Yeah.
Here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I got on the job in 2005, so just getting started. And so through my career and life and stuff like that, and just looking at the fire service and things that I felt like I was kind of missing, the big part of that is we're really, really good at training that basic skills in the American fire service and really everywhere from what I can tell. And that's primarily the focus, and we seems like we generally ignore the mental side of the fire service and emergency response in general. So that applies to cops and EMS providers as well. But it seems like the police have been doing this a little bit longer than the fire service has even looked at it. So really started kind of diving in with a couple guys at work about, that were some, one guy specifically was a former professional baseball player, pitcher. And, what are we missing here? And here's all the things that I'm kind of trying to work through, or here's the systems that I've just kind of created throughout my life. And I noticed that everybody kind of had their own little thing that they were doing that was trying to give them that mental edge, or how they were able to perform under certain circumstances, or just the longevity of the career. How did some of these senior guys be able to have that 30-year career? And, at Firefighter Craftsmanship, a big thing that we talk about a lot is the goal is to retire happy, healthy, and strong. And at all of our fire departments, we see people that do retire happy, healthy, and strong, and we absolutely see people that don't. Or they retire and they have a pretty bad attitude, leaving a career that really should fill us up. And they're really, really frustrated. And then some of those people, have a heart attack or stroke, or the rates of cancer are pretty high for retirees as well. And so really started diving into how does the mental side of the game play into that, and how can we get better, and so, a lot of times early in my career, I heard, and unfortunately I still hear it quite a bit all over the country is, well, we'll just figure it out when we get there. That's true. There's a lot of stuff when somebody calls 911, we're at the mercy of that caller telling dispatch what their perception of the emergency is. So yeah, we have to figure out a lot of stuff when we get there, but it sure as heck shouldn't be basic skills, right? We should be really, really good at stretching lines. We should be really, really good at searching houses, even in variable visibility conditions, and from different entry points and all of that sort of stuff. We should be really great at ventilation and understanding fire science and building construction and all of those things. So we shouldn't have to figure any of that out when we're there. It's just, what basics do we plug into whatever that 911 call specifically is, and then how do we try to solve that emergency the best that we possibly can. The problem is when we take that adage of, well, we'll just figure it out when we get there, and we look at it from a human performance and a mental performance perspective, it doesn't work. That's not how the body works. And so that's really kind of the foundation for firefighter craftsmanship, is human performance for the fire ground and the emergency scene, and then giving people real tangible tools. Most of them are free, that you already possess. You're already doing a lot of those. You just maybe don't understand how they actually work. And then we really like to nerd out on some stuff and Look at the psychological side of things, and currently enrolled in a master's program at University of Denver, looking at human performance psychology through the lens of sport coaching. There's a lot of really great resources and things like that there. So that's kind of how firefighter craftsmanship got started, and the big deal is, right, I'm a husband here in Northern Colorado, and I have 3 awesome little kids, and I want to make sure that I show up for them too. And so it's a lot of times it's really, really easy to show up when we go to work, and you're hanging out and you're solving problems at the kitchen table. It's when you come home, or you're home on that 4-day or your off days, or however your schedule works. Are you showing up, and are you bringing it there too? And I think that's a thing, unfortunately, that we see all of us at times we fall down on. It's really, really hard to do that, and, a guy that I work with talks about, like, how come we treat the people that love us the most, the worst at times, and so how do we mobilize ourselves and get tougher mentally and have we can implement at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize. I don't know if you can hear the dogs barking in the background, but we've got somebody delivering something around. They're going crazy. So, but no, I love all that stuff. I'm a person that really gets into, like you talked about, the basics, the fundamentals, pulling hose, forcing doors, just maneuvering with hose lines, just really enjoying the details of that type of stuff. And so, but like you said, I don't feel like there's a lot of ways that we can mentally train ourselves in the same way. So it's really interesting to me when you see people that are kind of going off in that direction, because it's like you said, it's just all one big picture. It's all together. And yes, the physical skills, the mechanics, all that stuff is going to help us do our job better. And it's going to make us safer and help us to get home and all that. But that mental side is just as important. It's going to do all of that stuff, but I feel like it's even more important for the home part of it. And for me, just being honest, and I say it a lot on here, talk a lot about trying to be honest with what I struggle with, but that's probably one of my biggest struggles, is being the same person at home as I am at work, giving the same energy at home as I am at work, being the same leader at home as at work. And so I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that kind of, that's probably one of their hardest areas to really deal with. And so, that's great stuff. I really think there's a need for that in the fire service. Is that just something that, is there anything that happened for you or to you that kind of sparked that interest, or is it just something that you think just kind of who you are?
I think the thing that really sparked it is, like, growing up as a kid, I had pretty crazy social anxiety that nobody knew about. And so my parents, of course, knew about it. Mine really kind of showed up like going to school. So every day was a battle at home for me to go to school. And I was a pretty lucky kid as far as like the community that I grew up in, which is here in Fort Collins as well. So kind of cool to serve the community now that I grew up in, and actually work in a firehouse that I remember going on station tours in like 2nd and 3rd grade. That's pretty cool, but so it wasn't like there was a dangerous situation or anything for me, but my anxiety, showed up in things like nausea and, feeling sick, and then not wanting to connect at school. And none of my friends knew that was happening. The teachers obviously knew, because I was always trying to get out of going to school. And I did well in school too. So I was very fortunate in that regard too. So we were just kind of missing the mark on, hey, what's really going on here? And that was before anybody would ever talk about that, and we're pretty lucky in the fire service right now where we can have these crazy conversations and guys can be honest about it. And it's like, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to try to kick ass on an emergency scene and do as well as I can and be dialed in, like you said, on forcing doors and stretching lines and search. And also trying to motivate the people around me and lead from the bottom and all of those sorts of things, but we all deal with stuff, And so, as far as like the home life, that for me, I don't get it right most of the time, and if my wife was here, she would definitely agree with that. It's just
That's why we don't invite them to these. We don't want the real. I mean, I'm okay with being honest and sharing stuff, but I don't really want that level of stuff out there.
That's a little too much. Yeah, for sure. And so it's just, how do I make myself a better person and then try to show up? And that's what's important to me is trying to show up, whether it's, now in school, and it's kind of funny to go back to school on purpose, and work really hard on this higher level degree. And for the sole reason not to just have a piece of paper. I don't care about that. I could care less about that. It's really, how do I take these concepts and really nerd out and then bring them to the street level emergency responder and help them be more successful, help them to be more mentally strong and mentally fit, and help them have better overall lives is really the goal, right? Yeah. So retire happy, healthy, and strong. And that retire happy, healthy, and strong, that window might only be 8 years for somebody, and that's okay. Then go do something else and kick ass at that, and that's perfectly acceptable. And that's kind of a big taboo thing to say in the fire service. It's, oh, well, if you don't make it 25 years, then you didn't do it right. And I don't agree with that. There's a window of time, and everybody has experiences through their lives that they bring to the job with them. Yeah. And they all have different 911 calls that they respond on that are going to affect them differently. We all carry some of those bricks in our backpack. And so can we mobilize people with tools to get rid of some of those bricks and have a healthy, successful career, however long that might be, and peer support, the conversation around mental health in the fire service and emergency services is fantastic, and it's getting better every month.
It's getting better. Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so just, before I ever forget to say it, if you have a program at your fire department, utilize that. If you have a peer support team, utilize that once a year at the very least, if not every 6 months or more, whatever you need. Like, don't be ashamed to utilize that. Go talk to a professional, use your EAP resources, all of those things. You're not soft for doing that stuff. It's actually going to make you a lot more resilient and better. And it's going to help you get rid of some of that stuff. At Firefighter Craftsmanship, we don't really work into that mental health, well, we definitely work in the mental health space, but not like the counseling space. Yeah. Because we're looking at how do we make people resilient before they need it?
Prevent the
concept that we talk about and developed a class around is called Presilience. So how do we build resilience before we ever need it? And the cool thing about resilience training is it doesn't mean that you just have to try to do 9,000 burpees every day, right? Like, that doesn't necessarily work. And so it's a part of it. Physical fitness is a part of it, but it's not all of it. And so what are the other parts and pieces that we can expose that'll help me better when I'm riding on the engine? It'll help me when I'm working on schoolwork late at night when everybody's asleep, and it'll help me when I'm maybe even trying to help like my kids with math homework, and I'm getting frustrated in fifth grade, kind of a deal. So all of those sorts of things. The really neat thing is that they're all the same tools, because our body physiologically reacts the same way to stress, whether it's positive stress or it's negative stress. And a lot of times we really get to kind of choose how we process that information, and then how we get rid of that information as well.
One thing that I think is interesting, as you're talking, you gave your story when you were younger about that social anxiety. And, this is something else that I mention a lot, but I feel like there are a lot of people in the fire service that maybe not to the level that you were facing it, but they face a lot of that right now. And a lot of it is like training wise. That's where I see it come out the most, or at least that's where I notice it the most. These people are, a lot of them are great. They're great at their job. They're solid. They're people you can count on when you need somebody to get something done. But when it comes to training or practicing it, it's almost like they're scared to death of it. And it's just a weird mix. You know what I mean? It's like, I've seen you do this in real life. There's nothing to worry about. You know, why are you so stressed out about it? But, you know, that's just something that they're fighting. And so again, why some of this stuff you're doing right now is so important to work through those things.
Yeah. And I think, you know, really we talk about like the culture of failure and what does that look like, you know, at our crew level. Personally, first off, our crew level, our battalion, our department, the American Fire Service or whatever emergency services you're involved in. You know, and if we look at the American Fire Service specifically around the culture of failure, like you're talking about, is what do we do to our young? You know, is we eat our young in the fire service.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
you don't know anything, sit down, shut up. I've been here for however many irrelevant years, right? Potentially,
Yeah.
you know, so I know more than you, and that's just not necessarily true. And so that really starts in the fire academy, you know, and a lot of fire academies are based around a failure-based system. So you show up and today we're throwing ladders. Awesome. Never threw ladders. Has nothing to do with whether I'm a millennial or not, right? It's just those experiences that I had. So teach me. And then instead of teaching us, we have a giant ego fest, you know, at whatever module that is in the basic skill about I know more than you do. And then, well, you didn't do it right. So now you're doing push-ups. You know,
Yeah.
well, I didn't do it right because you never taught me how to do it. You know, and there's definitely departments around the country that are failure based, you know, where you start with a certain number of points on day one of the academy. And if you drop below a certain number of points, you don't have a job anymore. And so that creates a very, very big fear around failure in what should be the best and biggest opportunity for a learning environment that we possibly have. And that defines people's careers, right? So you've heard a lot of people talk about, you know, like, traumas and stuff like that, or, you know, training traumas and things like that. I'm blanking on the word that I'm looking for, but I think you understand what I'm saying, you know, of
Training scars.
Training scars. Yeah, there you go. And that's typically around, you know, SCBA confidence mazes and things like that.
Yeah.
I won't get on my soapbox in there, you know, by any means, but we just have to understand that we have an impact on other people, and we certainly have an impact on ourselves based on how we're talking to ourselves in that 6-inch space between our ears, you know? And so I think really, you know, from like the crew first culture standpoint is as we're talking to our companies and we're trying to lead from the top and from the bottom and from the lateral position, is what does failure look like, and really defining that, you know? And Carol Dweck, who's a PhD, I believe she is on staff still at Stanford, wrote a fantastic book called Mindset. And it looked at a big research project about children, and they looked at a bunch of different factors on which of those kids over a long course of time was the most successful in different things, financially, relationship wise, personally, health, all that sort of stuff. And the kids that were the most successful were that growth mindset kid, you know? And so for those of us with kids in school, we've probably heard the school at least talk about, well, we want to be a growth mindset school versus a fixed mindset school, you know?
Yeah.
And that's really based in the culture of failure. And how do we look at failure? It doesn't mean we have to accept failure and just be like, oh man, I messed that up. Big deal. That's okay. Right? Like, not necessarily, you know, there's a time to put out. And when that 911 calls comes in, it's time to put out. Like, that's the Super Bowl, especially if it's a good fire, you know, and people are counting on us, or it's a cardiac arrest. People are counting on us to try to do everything we possibly can. And we win some of those and we don't win some of those, you know? And so the ones that we don't win, how do we look at that as failure? Yeah, that was a failure. Now, what do we do? How do we go from here? Do we just blame everybody else? Do we blame ourselves, or do we get back to the table and we work really, really hard, you know? And so like when you're talking about from a department perspective, you know, if we have company testing, we call it company performance testing, CPTs, you know, and people get pretty stressed out about that on very, very basic skill stuff that they can absolutely crush. And so, but you know, why do we have the blue flu where people are calling sick for those major trainings? You know, it's like, oh, it's a burn day now. That same person has called in sick the last 3 major trainings. That to me is a good opportunity, especially if you're a company officer or you have a friend that continues to do that, to be like, hey, what's going on? How can I help you work through this? Like, how can I help you build your confidence, which it just comes from within you. You just got to believe it, but you got to put in the hard work to be able to believe some of that stuff. And so those are all the things that we really can chase a bunch of tangents on.
Oh yeah.
Are fired up about, at Firefighter Craftsmanship, is really, how do we build people's confidence? How do we build a different view of failure and success? How do we celebrate our wins, no matter how small they are, if we're trying to change organizationally, right? Like sometimes that's a grind, man, and
Yeah.
so like we're really, really good at complaining about what's not happening, but we're really bad as a group in the fire service about celebrating even that smallest a win and giving us that little dopamine bump and then getting some momentum from that,
Yeah. And I keep wanting to move on to the topic, but there's just good stuff in this, so we're just going to go with it. But what you mentioned there towards the end of that, I think, is very important, and I don't want it to be just missed. You talked about somebody that is not performing and having a conversation with them about what's going on to get to the bottom of it, to get it fixed. I think that right there is a very important piece of all this that a lot of places aren't using. They're not investing in that little piece, just taking the time to address what is going on, address the problem. That doesn't mean that you jump in their face and make them feel an inch tall. That means having a conversation, hopefully a one-on-one conversation with nobody else around, so that it can be as honest as possible, hopefully with somebody that, there's a relationship there built so that you can really get the most out of that conversation, but truly figure out what's going on. We've got people that I've seen, or, that I've heard lots of stories over time about, that, these people they've never had issues at all, but all of a sudden they do a training exercise and they freak out and with a mask on. And it's like, if you don't address that right there and figure out what the problem is and put in place some motions to get it fixed, man, it's just a bad deal. And I feel like it's almost like you're negligent in one of the worst ways possible, because for one, this person is somebody you're responsible for. It's somebody you should, be caring about. It's somebody you're liable for, if you're a formal leader or training or whatever. But it's just, why aren't we taking care of our people? And taking care of our people sometimes means, man, what's going on? This isn't like you. Is there something going on that's causing this or whatever? But it's got to start with that conversation. And it's really sad to see things like that happen and it completely get ignored because we're worried about feelings or we're worried about this or that. And it is so harmful to crews and to individuals and the fire service in general. And so do you see that as well? Is that kind of an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head there, and whether you're a company officer or not, it doesn't matter, and so sometimes that probie, might have a great relationship with that officer, or that senior firefighter, engineer, whatever. And they're like, man, something's off, and all of us have bad days, and the goal really as a crew, we talk about this as a crew, is I have bad days too, and I want the crew to know real quick, like, hey, Housley's having a bad day today. And then they ask me about it. It's not just like, well, we're going to weather the storm and let his ADHD run wild. We're going to chase a bunch of shiny objects today, right? Like, hey man, what's going on? Like, let's focus in here a little bit, everything all right, and then shut your mouth and listen, and so, I mean, that's a duty that we have to each other, and that's a duty that we have to ourselves, and to build that that cohort of people around you, 1 or 2 up to 5 people that you can really have an open, honest conversation with, and say, man, this is really bugging me and I don't know why, or I'm off, I'm angry all the time, and now I'm pissed because I'm angry all the time and I don't know why I'm angry and I can't stop it.
Yeah.
Right. That's a super common thing that happens to us in emergency response, and I think probably most of the listeners, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you've certainly experienced that just being in the game for a while, and so how do we deal with that sort of stuff in a healthy way? Right. And that healthy way isn't the Jameson bottle, and so, and it might also not be just working out harder. That might not be what, it's probably going to be based in some sort of mindfulness practice. And for sure, it's going to be based in a breath practice. That's going to, you're targeting your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system is overtaxed. You have hypervigilance going on, which is a super common thing for us to have. Just a lot of us don't know, and so that's where, like, using those check-ins with that peer support, that professional, if you have a firefighter or a senior person that's ripped their mask off in a training, like, that's a serious issue.
Yeah.
And they probably don't know why they did it, so it's like, if I roll in there and I'm just like, hey man, why'd you do that? Like, I don't know what happened. Like, all of a sudden my mask was off my face and I'm just like, don't do that again.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I didn't think about that.
Okay.
They know the consequences of ripping the mask off of their face, and so that would be a time it's like, hey, what's going on? And maybe they're willing to unpack that with you. Maybe they're not, but that's a really good time of getting that professional involved. And that's like, all right, man, how can we help get to the base of this? And they might not even understand what's going on. More than likely, it's going to have something to do with their sympathetic nervous system and that hypervigilance. And it's just a chronic stress that we incur in the fire service and emergency services, long hours, overworked, mandatory overtime, no sleep. All of those things can ruminate and come out in a thing as simple as ripping a mask off the face and that person not having
absolutely.
So I think this,
and I speak that because I've been there. I've been that person that has, we do workouts, off and on, not consistently, but there's been times where we've done consistent on air workouts, as crews through the years. And there'll be times when, we're very comfortable in doing that. And then just all of a sudden, man, what the heck? I'm about to freak out. I know I'm getting air. What's going on? It's so weird how it could just come. And if you aren't prepared to really mentally handle that, it's going to put you in a bad spot really quick. So yeah, there's a lot there, man. I know that this is an area that you're very passionate about, and you obviously have a lot of great content in that area. So definitely, if anybody out there is interested in learning more about these type of things, look Kevin up and see what he has. Lots of resources to get you more prepared for that. But I want to make sure that we get into this because as I teased in the introduction, you're wanting to bring up something that I have not ever even heard of. So I want to get into this and let you explain it as well as you want to do it. But you brought up something called self-determination theory. So I don't know anything else about it. I have no other ways of introducing it besides that. So just tell me what I need to hear about it and kind of how it can help us.
Yeah, sounds good. And I appreciate you keeping us on task too, right?
No, I don't care. We could go on and on, but I am I'm selfish. I want to hear this.
I like it. Yeah. So yeah, let's build on some leadership stuff, And so this, once again, isn't tied to your rank in the department or your organization. And so self-determination theory is kind of it's maybe one of the most studied psychological theories in the space. And so, like, one thing that kind of took me a little while to wrap my head around as I'm studying this stuff is the way that psychology world uses the term theory is a little bit than I personally used it. And I don't know if I'm alone in that. To me, theory was like this like grandiose woo-woo vision of like, this might be happening, but I don't really have anything to say yes or no. And in the psychology space, they're never going to use the word prove or proven. It's always up for debate, you know, and when you have any educational stuff, people they get paid money to debate all day. I'm not sure how they've even figured out how to do that, you know, so bravo to them. Figured out how to make money just talking back and forth all day. But so self-determination theory was created by a couple psychologists, Ryan and DC, in 1985 is when they wrote this initial book. And it's really changed a lot of the landscape in the psychology world for the most part. I'm not going to debate that all day, right? So, but it's probably the most heavily studied theory in the psychology space. And it comes down to, they were trying to figure out what motivates people. So motivates people organizationally, but also motivates people internally. So intrinsic motivation. And as all of us as officers or people that are trying to make organizational change or push our crews to be a little bit better from the bottom up, we all pretty much know by now that you can't motivate other people. You might be able to tell them what to do and they might do it, but you're not going to necessarily motivate them to do it by themselves. That's got to come from within them. So a decision. And so Ryan and DC, you know, they wrote this book in 85 and they basically came up with saying, hey, there are 3 principles that really go into motivation, and even more so than motivation, like connectedness. And so like you were just talking about, hey, we should have relationships with people where we can identify something's off, or be able to have some tough conversations. Not, hey, you're in trouble, but hey, man, what's going on, right? That conversation for a lot of us is a lot harder to like show that caring, softer side of humanity than it is of, hey, you didn't follow this. Now here's a plan for improvement or whatever, right? Like those things are pretty black and white. But so self-determination theory has 3 main parts to it. And the first part is autonomy. And so if we look at autonomy, like from a crew level, that just means, do people want to have some say in the vision and the course of their life, whether that's their personal life or that's their professional life? They want to have some say in that, right? And so that's why a lot of times, like organizationally, when the chief comes down and says, we're doing this, it's not necessarily that people are that resistant to change, is they didn't feel like they had some say in that, and hey, this impacts maybe what my personal goals are, or whatever. And so autonomy, people really want to be able to drive the course of their own existence. And really people don't want to suck, right? And so like, you see it, you know, even guys and girls that aren't real motivated about the job, they're not super psyched about training on basic skills. And then they talk all day long about either their side hustle, or hiking or mountain biking or whatever, you know, and you're like, man, they have intrinsic motivation over that, right? Because they get to control some of those things. And so that really falls into the autonomy. So the second part of self-determination theory is competence. And competence, we crush it in the fire service, right? All of our training is based around competence. It's basic skills training. It's getting better. It's reacting and adapting to new information or new building construction techniques, whatever it is, right? We're really, really good at training at competence. And that's a very, very easy thing for us to train within. Is how do we force that door better next time or whatever, right? How do we stretch the line better on this certain apartment building? Those sorts of things, competence, you know, so that one, we're killing it. We're doing a really good job. The last one is kind of tough. And this is what you really talk a lot about on this podcast, you know, is relatedness. So we have autonomy, competence, and relatedness are the 3 main parts of self-determination theory. So relatedness means, how am I connected either to the group? It could be, how am I connected to myself? How am I connected to my organization? And then am I willing to help carry the torch on that sort of stuff, you know? And so I think really, you know, with your podcast specifically and the content that you put out, you know, you talk mostly about autonomy and relatedness. And there's not a lot of conversation happening around that. You know, there's a lot of really good training groups out there that are crushing the competence world, you know, and you can, all these really cool local fire conferences are popping up and everybody's talking about competence and how do we do that? Because that's a really easy thing for us to measure. You know, the autonomy and the relatedness part is tough. And so relatedness is, if I'm on your crew, right, how do I connect to that group? Am I the outsider? Am I that one person that's not connecting, you know. And so like as an officer specifically, you need to make sure that, hey, we are pushing people, we're giving them options to really drive the course of their life and their career. We're making sure we're hitting basic skills, which I'm guessing you are. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably crushing basic skill work. But we also need to make sure, as a group, how are we connecting, you know? And I think, you know, from the COVID stuff, we really saw that humans are organisms that have to be connected to other people. And there was a lot of angst and fear and all that stuff that happened once we said, don't be around other people. And it created a lot of mental health issues that we're still seeing some serious windfall from, you know. And so that really falls into that relatedness, you know. And the theory is so big that from this, it's created 6 mini theories, and we won't get into that because that's, you know, each one of those is a massively studied thing, but it, you know, and how does that relate? But those are the big 3 parts. So autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And then how do all of those tie into connectedness and specifically intrinsic motivation?
So let's start here. You know, like you said, I think competence, that's a pretty easy one, if not just for the fire service, but anybody, because like you said, you can see that if you go watch somebody do something, you can tell very quickly if they are competent or not. You can teach it. It's easy to transfer and mentor and all that. For me, I feel like relatedness, it might not come natural to everybody, but it's pretty easy to work on and find ways to increase. But honestly, I think if there's one that I would struggle with trying to figure out how to use to motivate those that I'm leading would be autonomy, because, you know, with the fire service, you know, if you are a firefighter, you are way down the line, you have no decision making, you know, at all. You are at the mercy of everybody above you. But even if you go up, I'm a captain, you're a captain. Yeah, we can make decisions to a very small point, you know, when it comes to at the firehouse or on scene or whatever, until somebody takes it. But really, we're still handcuffed to what comes down. So for me, speaking personally, I still struggle with not really having any of that as far as, you know, what I feel. So I guess just starting out as, you know, if you are a formal leader, if you are a station officer or whatever, how can we help our team feel more autonomous within the realm of control we have?
That's a good question. That one's got some big meat hooks in it, right?
Yeah.
You know that, yeah, when you figure it out, let me know, right? I think really is, how do we create environments that give our people a voice, and not just to make them feel good of like, okay, I'm giving you a voice, but the decision is already made, you know?
Yes.
So how do we get them involved in projects that they're passionate about, that they can relate to, that they have competence or are able to gain competence within, but then they can also drive progress, you know, either personally or organizationally or at the crew level, you know? And so one thing that Captain McKeon, who teaches with us, and he's kind of our big, you know, tactical fitness side of firefighter craftsmanship, that I took from him, is the way that he's built autonomy. And he wouldn't use that word, you know, but we have training blocks that we get. And so we get 1 to 2 training blocks a month typically. And that training block, it's a pretty cool thing organizationally, where we can go out of service up to 4 hours and train on something. And so you can do a little bit bigger production, and Captain McKeon's on a truck. And so they can set up a big rope system or do a con space training or whatever they're working on. Okay. But what he realized is, you know, when you go around and you say, hey guys, what do you want to train on? I'm building the training calendar for next month. What do you guys want to work on? You know, and there's like, oh, it's all good. You know, it's like, well, you're the boss, you figure it out, whatever that answer that you get, you'll get some good suggestions along the way. But what he realized is that they were definitely missing some stuff, you know, And so what Captain McKeon did is he gives a training block, and I've been doing this too, even down to the Pro B. Hey man, this month, this training block is yours. And we can train on whatever you want, but it's 100% up to you to set it up. You're teaching the class, or you're getting the person here that's going to teach the class. That could even be somebody on the crew, but you are the logistical planning portion of this training. And that's been a really, really effective thing, because we all miss stuff, right? We might be prone to be like, yeah, I want to go out and stretch lines all the time, but then we forget about working on the RIT pack, right? Or we're missing something in relation to mental health or mental fitness, or something, you know, a little bit outside the box. Or as an engine company, we haven't done ropes and knots in a year, whatever it is. And that gives them an opportunity. And you'll see guys that will start taking notes of like, all right, this is something I think that this training could have gone better, or here's some lessons that we learned, right? That growth mindset stuff. Here's what we learned by not always winning in training, right? You shouldn't always win in training. You should figure out ways to win by the end of it, right? But if you're going out and you're crushing it every single time and you never experience any adversity in training, you're just simply doing it wrong. And so that's a really easy way to create some autonomy, is you give somebody, this is yours. Now do your thing, right? And I'm here to help you. I can help you teach. I can help you with your public speaking. I can help you with the format of your class, things like that. But like as an officer, I need training too. So if I have the answers to the test, because I'm the one that set up the evolution every time, that doesn't help me either, right? And I need training too. And so that's where it's really fun, even as that probie, to come in. You know, the probies are learning some cool new stuff in the fire academy that you might not have ever heard before. So have them teach you something new, and stress them out a little bit by making them, hey man, you're up, right? We're here to support you, but teach us something, or a better way to do it, or something that's been driving you kind of crazy that I do. What's a better way for me to do that, right? That would be a really, really easy way at all levels of the organization to create some autonomy.
Yeah. And that's something I guess kind of our version of that, as far as just my crew, is actually, it took years for this to happen, because I knew this was something that we needed to do. For some reason, I just struggled doing it, putting it into practice and pushing it and staying consistent. But just kind of starting off every day with something, you know, if it's me kind of throwing out some leadership stuff that I've been thinking about, or if there's something going on in the news with the fire service, a scene or things that we could talk about, laying it out and going through it, throwing in some EMS protocols here and there regularly, because, you know, I will be the first to say I'm not a big EMS person, but that is part of our job. So I don't want to ignore that. Line of duty desks, you can throw in all kinds of things, but just kind of make that a part of every morning. And so I guess the first of the year, I kind of finally said, okay, it needs to happen. And I was the one that needed to be convinced of it. Nobody else, you know, everybody else they're on board with it. I just had to be the one to push it and make sure that I stay consistent with it. But man, that's been some great conversation. Just me throwing out some things that have been on my mind, and having, you know, an hour conversation about it, or 15 minutes, whatever it is. Or thankfully, I've got one of my firefighters is a super paramedic. He loves EMS. And so that's been a great thing to have, because that has easily transitioned into me saying, okay, you bring some protocols to us every once in a while. You know, I don't care if it's once a tour, once every other shift, whatever. Just have something that you find is interesting, or that we might struggle with, or whatever. And we can go over it. So I've kind of handed that to him. And I've actually got two of my firefighters are just barely over a year on. They're the newest firefighters we have. And so the other one, I try to hand some LODD stuff to, because he's done that in the past. And so just trying to find those areas that they're interested in and give them something to do. It's only going to help me because they're taking a piece of, that learning and responsibility for all that. So it obviously makes my job easier anyway. But I think a key to that is, it's a great idea what you said, is just saying, hey, this day is going to be your time. Come up with something to run us through, and leave it at that as far as what you give them. Because if we have the tendency of saying, hey, you got this time, we're going to go over hazmat, I need you to come up with this or that. Well, if that's not anything they're interested in, then it's not doing anybody any good, especially the people that are going to be trained. Because if they gave that to me, I wouldn't be giving you a very good class over, because I just don't care about it. You know what I mean? So really, it goes back to relationships again, learning your people to the point of, okay, he's really interested in this area, she loves this, whatever, and letting them explore that passion and truly start gaining knowledge. And something else is, you talked about even that new recruit, and I think that is something that I've really tried to focus on with these two, is telling them, you're new right now as far as when they come on, but that new is going to not last very long. And it's not, because we got recruits right now. So it will be a couple months and they'll be over somebody with like a year and a half on. So hurry up, get competent in what you're doing, get squared away, but then start transitioning into, okay, I'm learning to teach. I'm learning this stuff to the point where I can comfortably and confidently teach it to somebody else, because that's right around the corner. And like you said, I really think that that's something that we need to hit hard right out of the gate. Get that just implanted in who we are. And so that down the road, it's just how we do it. So I think I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there at the end with the recruits, the new probies, whatever you call them, right? Hey, get really good at this, right? So we're hitting competence. Get really, really good at this. Like if you're the nozzle, like for our department, when they come out of the academy, they're riding that third seat on an engine company, and they're the nozzle firefighter, which is arguably the most important job on the fire ground, with the person that has potentially no experience other than however long your fire academy is. They can make or break that call, no doubt about it, for firefighters and for sure for the customer, them, and so competence is huge. And so I think we're doing, like I said, a good job about that. But you also talked about, hey, yeah, you're a probie now, but there's another school going on, there's another academy going on right now. So here in 6-8 months to a year, you are going to be above somebody that then they can relate to. You might still be on probation based on how your department does it, but they are going to come to you of, hey, how do I navigate firehouse culture? How do my company's not training. What do you guys do? Now they're knocking that relatedness part out of the park, right? So now if we give them permission and we give them tools and guidance and direction on how to control their motivation and control their career, and how to celebrate those small wins, and how to deal with those losses, right? And how to deal with the frustration of, the excuse that it takes us forever to change or whatever it is. Then they're getting that and they're like, okay, I'm actually in control of what I get to do here. And that's where the fire service to me is still so awesome, is whatever you're into, there is a spot for you, right?
Yep.
If you're super into fitness, 100% a spot for you. If you're super into hazmat, absolutely a spot for you, right? And so figure out how you can dominate the fields that you're interested in and be competent in the other things that we have to be competent in, because when they call 911, they expect us to be competent in those realms. And then how are we building really good cohesive teams that are really pushing the envelope in a positive way, right? We don't want the chief calling us every day. We don't want to be in the chief's office. That's not a positive thing. Like, how can we make a positive impact, relate to one another, take care of one another, and really build that family environment, even if you don't really like somebody, right? Like, I know that there's people out there that just aren't going to get along with each other, right? But based on however your department works with staffing, you might not have a choice, right? So
Yeah.
how do we cross those bridges and build some relationships where we can at least work with some folks and help each other be better and have good conversations? And you don't have to agree with everybody. That's what makes the systems work, right? We should have disagreements in a healthy way. And there's a lot of passion and a lot of alpha type personalities, and so I think that's really, really where we're probably missing it, is the autonomy, and as a department, if you're in a place where you are, however the rank structure works, and you're able to make some pretty big decisions and have people bring stuff up, Von Appen talks about this a lot, is, man, make sure you're pouring gas on that fire for these people that are motivated to get out there and do work and look at new hose loads and new hose specs and nozzles and all that stuff, versus, quenching that or peeing on them, really, or having that, like I said earlier, if that decision's already made, just tell them. Don't let them go down this massive road, because you're just murdering that autonomy part. And now you might have lost them forever, and they might even leave, and that's not good. So I think autonomy is a big, big deal right now. And we're looking at burnout at crazy rates. If we look at a pretty heavily studied population as nurses, lots and lots of shift work stuff about nurses, and cancer with shift work with nurses specifically, and all this stuff. It's been researched for quite a long time. Last year they did a survey through the American Nurses Association, and over 42% of nurses thought about leaving the profession last year. So that probably is going to be even higher than that, to be honest, right? It's probably well over 50%. And so we see that for sure in EMS. There's less people applying for EMS jobs. We for sure see that in med school as well, and new doctors and PAs and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm not sure that the fire service is that far behind. So how do we change that narrative at the company level first? Because we can control that pretty easy, but for sure at the department level of, are we taking care of our folks? And if you let people do a bunch of work that the decision's already been made, and then you act like it wasn't already made, that's just killing that autonomy right there.
Yeah. And so to take it a different direction, or not really a different direction, but just a different perspective, I started that off from the lens of an officer or formal leader, but to incorporate those listening that aren't in that role. If you are listening and you're a firefighter, and this is something you're struggling with, that autonomy and just feeling like you're not allowed to really enjoy the job, or however you want to word it. And I'll get kind of your feedback as well, but for me, it kind of feels like it's almost the same route, but a little bit different, because you're not in control. But find those areas that you really enjoy, that energize you, and that you just can't get enough of, and start getting better at them, start learning, come up with some classes, or come up with something to share with others, and just try to start. I have been turned down a lot for things that I brought up. A lot of us have. I'm sure you probably have too. So it doesn't guarantee that it's going to give you opportunity, where you're at, but there's always other opportunities. If you get to that point and you have things to share, and you're not allowed to do it where you're at, then go to some outside conferences, go to some, go to a nearby volunteer department, see if they want to do some work with you. There's so many options out there. And if we just focus on what we really enjoy doing, that energizes us and keeps us full, and just keep looking for ways to push that out and share that, I think that's a really good way to keep that going. Is there anything else that you can kind of see, or other ideas from that informal perspective?
Yeah, it's a grind, right? Like, nobody's going to lie to you, I think, and be like, oh yeah, I've won every battle I've brought forward,
Yeah.
And so really, how do you let's go back to the culture of failure, is how do you process that? What's your reaction to that? Because people are paying attention, and that's something that for sure is always a work in progress for me, is, a pretty motivated personality, and is making sure, hey, all right, it's okay to be frustrated. Like a lot of times we talk a lot about in the fire service of like, oh, well, you shouldn't be frustrated about that. No, that's a totally normal human emotion. So be frustrated, but probably make sure you know who your audience is, don't be hammering the chief. Just go back to your circle of people and be like, man, I'm frustrated right now, go force some doors, on a prop or whatever, smash the crap out of that thing and get it out of you. That's a totally normal human emotion. And so, a pretty selfish plug, but we created a site called emergencyresponderacademy.com. And the whole premise of that site is if you got some information, you can come share that on that platform. So we're basically just creating a giant training library. I'd love to see you teach a leadership class on there. And that platform will host it for you. You can charge for it if you want. You can give it away for free if you want. There's a lot of information on that, emergencyresponderacademy.com. So that's just kind of a grassroots way for us to change the narrative, right? So if you got a good class and your department is like, don't care, man, come share it there, because somebody else is going to care. And now your impact is more than just that. However big your fire department is, you potentially are impacting a much bigger organization, and so everybody's pretty comfortable now with online learning. And so that's a thing. And we can walk you through how that whole process works. So those are some ways, right? Like if we can't create positive change in the way that we think we should be able to create at our organization, there's a way to do it. And maybe you're impacting somebody else in a positive way. And man, that's a pretty cool win. But really, I think, take those lessons. Hey, no, Jeremy, nope. Good idea, but nope. And I'm not even going to give you a reason. Okay. If you look at the Jocko, okay, good. Now it gives me time to go back and to make my presentation next time better, and to answer those questions that they asked before they ask them, and how do I set up a really good proposal? Do I need to be a better writer? Do I have to not send them a 800 slide PowerPoint? It needs to be 6 slides or whatever it is. Those are all things that we can learn, and man, it's not easy, and it definitely is frustrating, but I think that really taps into that autonomy of, okay, that didn't work, but I still can drive the narrative. And like you said, at some point, maybe you can't at your organization, and it might be time to do something else or go somewhere else and make a positive change there.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, I hadn't heard of that. So I appreciate you bringing that up for sure. I would definitely check that out. But I think that's really awesome to hear, because not only are you giving an outlet to somebody like what I just said, somebody that might not have any other way to really feel like they're impacting anybody, but it's also a way to explore that part of things. I'm not very far into the game of, speaking or instructing and all that, even though I've got 20 something, more than 20 years on. Publicly putting myself out there is still a very new thing for me. So you obviously don't just start really good at it. You put the practice at it, and getting used to that setting and just what your voice is, finding your voice, man, that's a great thing to be able to do. So I'm glad you brought that up. So I love just simple stuff that is really impactful. You break the self-determination theory down to 3 things that we can really focus on. And I see there's a lot of great practical use for this, not even really getting into it any further than we've already done. I can already see and starting to think about how I can apply these things to my crew and how we can help use it to help us. Getting into just talking about trying to build effective firefighters and efficient and exceptional cultures. Is this kind of the blueprint that you personally use? Are there other things that you try to involve in that? What are your focuses when you're kind of looking at building culture?
Yeah, I think now that I have, these words, it's like, oh yeah, that fit into one of those three areas. Right. So goal setting 100% fits into autonomy, and so writing those goals down and being able to drive those goals and celebrate those wins, that's where that whole thing goes into. And some people on here hate goals and some people on here love them. But just realize that there are heavily studied psychological principles, which is why we continue to hear so much about micro goal setting and company goal setting, personal goal setting, all that sort of stuff. That's where that falls in. So I think now that I have this language and have done quite a bit of work studying this stuff and figure out, hey, how can we use this personally and then at the crew level for sure. Yes, I think SDT is a fantastic resource to use, and so we created a free downloadable for your listeners. You can go to firefightercraftsmanship.com/crew. And I'm guessing you'll throw that in the show notes. Firefightercraftsmanship.com/crew. And it's just a super simple downloadable that talks about autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And then it has a framework that you can just plug it in. And so the first part of that is how is this working personally? So a lot of us have physical fitness goals. We're still pretty early in 2023. So hopefully whatever your New Year's resolutions, you're still on it, right? But if not, let's take a look at it from the SDT, self-determination theory framework, and plug it in there, right? Like, how am I driving that conversation? What does competence look like within that goal set? And then how am I relating to this, or why does this really matter? And so the first part is personal of that downloadable. And then the second part is as a crew or a team or organization, whatever level you're at, is how are we doing this sort of stuff? So especially if you're a company officer, really writing that down. How am I being supportive to my people on these three things? We're probably crushing competence, but maybe you're not, maybe somebody's super interested in hazmat, which you absolutely need those folks, but you're not giving them space and you're not giving them support. So maybe you guys aren't competent in that space. That's an easy one to talk about there. So there's some stuff, if you Google self-determination theory, you're going to get literally millions of hits, and so I think that, building effective teams really comes from this. Certainly high quality communication builds in there. I think we've talked a lot about failure and what does failure look like and how do we have that conversation and relationship. And if you can hit those things, they're all pretty big deals. They're simple, but super, super hard to actually implement. Simple concepts, but really, really hard to actually do.
Yeah.
I think if you focus on those, then you're going to be light years ahead of everybody else, right? And it's not just to support your personal ego. Let's just call that out, right? It's not for your personal gain. And so crush it on your personal stuff too, but if you're there and you're actually doing it for the crew as an officer, you might have to do some stuff that you just don't want to do. And that's okay, right? That's the whole point. That's why you wanted to get promoted.
Yeah. So, I feel like there's so many of these topics that I feel like I know exactly where I land on. This is my opinion of it. And so many times, and a lot of them have been right here over this podcast, I've talked to people and have completely changed everything the way I feel about things. And so I'm always interested to really get other people's opinions on some of these things that may seem very basic and obvious, but man, words and phrases can mean so many different things. And so it's always interesting to me. So two things that we've brought up just now are building exceptional cultures and building effective teams. So are those the same thing to you? Are there different approaches to doing each one? What differentiates and is similar with those to you? If you could verbalize that, that's probably not a very easy question.
I like it a lot. Yeah, that's a great one. It's like an interview panel here. Thanks a lot. So I think, culture is probably that overarching theme of like, this is what we do and this is who we are. And this really is our why in living and breathing form. And man, we got to protect the culture, right? Like that culture, once it starts to slip, that's a really, really hard thing to stop it from going down the slide. And it's
Yep.
like climbing a sand dune once you lose it, where you're taking 3 steps up and 2 steps backwards. And it's just a slog to try to get that back. So I think, to me, culture is that overarching theme of this is who we are. And if you ask somebody outside, if it's an ambulance provider or a police, whatever, is like, they should be able to somewhat articulate what that culture actually is, not necessarily just from people inside tooting their own horn. But I think the teams is really what drives that culture. And so there's a lot of different cultures, right? You have a department, if we're looking at the fire service, you have a department culture, and you have the mission statement on the wall and core values and all that sort of stuff. But all the way down to that 3 or 4 person engine company or whatever you ride on the rig, right? There's also a culture there, and there's a culture A versus B versus C shift, and battalions within those shifts and things like that. And so I think the team is that dynamic that, you get enough teams together, they can change that organizational culture. You got one team that's rogue and they're trying to do it all by themselves, man, that's going to be a really, really long and miserable battle, And so that's kind of how I would break that down. And really, you got to look at what can I have a true impact on? And maybe that's just my personal culture, So we talk a lot about, hey, in the fire academy or, at conferences across the country that we've had great opportunities to be out of, man, I get it, dude. You're on a company that doesn't train and they think they know everything and they're more interested in the new show on Netflix. But man, you get to have your personal culture and really try to change that team first. Yeah, you might be stretching lines in the bay by yourself, and that sucks. I get it. Unfortunately, you'll probably have to do that at some point in your career, even if you're an officer, And so how do we change the culture of ourselves? How do we change the culture of our team? And then you get that snowball effect where it starts to really roll and you can make some really quality positive change.
Yeah. And that's actually something that I just had a conversation yesterday about. We had a leadership class that we had brought in, and afterwards just got into a conversation with a couple other leaders in the department. And that's what was brought up. You've got the culture of the Edmond Fire Department, which is where I work, but then you got our shifts are red, blue, green, and you got the culture of red and green and blue. But then you obviously got red 3, which is what we are, a culture, and green 2. And there's so many breakdowns, and you can, that there is some negatives to that, because it can almost be nobody's on the same page type thing. But kind of what the point that I brought up was, I get that, but honestly, from where I'm at, I can't do anything else but make my culture great. Make my culture as exceptional as I possibly can. If that's all I can do, then I'm sorry that other people aren't, meeting that standard, but really that's all I can do. I hope that it bleeds over, into others. But sometimes, like you said, just if you, all you can do is your little circle, make it better and shiny and competent and a great team, then that's a great day, or that's a great thing to accomplish. And hopefully over time you can have some influence on people outside of that. But you can get frustrated very quickly by trying to do too much outside of that, because you don't have control over that. So it's definitely something to kind of keep in mind as you're going through that process, if you are trying to change the culture for the better.
For sure. Yeah. And you got an opportunity wherever you're at, even if you're first day on the job, that you have a great opportunity to make an impact. So first day on the job, if you're in a department that sends you as the nozzle firefighter, you got a pretty good opportunity to make a huge impact, right? And so just try to be where you are, and really try not to get too greedy about change and culture and things like that, and just try to motivate at the level that you can. And it's a slog, but don't forget to celebrate those wins is a big, big deal.
Yeah, man, that's good stuff, Kevin. I'm excited to continue, conversations with you and build a relationship with you. I really want to gain some more knowledge through all of this because I feel like we have done a really good job of making these changes and creating a culture that we all are proud of from basically nothing, building it up, but it's taken so much time and we have a lot of room that we can still grow. And so I'm just I get excited when I find new ideas of ways to improve on that. So I thank you for sharing all that. Is there anything else that you want to kind of finish up with or thoughts that we haven't talked about yet before we close up?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I think it's super important stuff and excited to learn from other people, so I'd love to hear some feedback, and I'm excited to learn from you as well, as we continue to grow as people and officers and firefighters and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, please, if you have ideas or you need help or you need a sounding board, anybody, hit us up at firefightercraftsmanship.com, or we'd love to see some of you start throwing classes on emergencyresponderacademy.com, or hit us up on the socials or whatever. We're absolutely a sounding board. And I think that this space, this mental fitness space, mental performance space is a really exciting time in the fire service. We finally have some good conversations happening around mental health specifically. But there's a lot of, spokes in that big wheel about mental fitness. And peer support is absolutely one of those. But it's not the only one, and so
Yeah.
What are we doing to mobilize and empower our people and make sure that they have the right tools and they're successful to have good, happy, healthy, long careers, so don't ever forget, right? The goal is to retire happy, healthy, and strong, and to do it, the right way, and to put yourself out there as far as serving the customers, internal, external, and yourself. It's a big deal.
Perfect. So you talked about your social media, the websites. If somebody's trying to get a hold of you personally, if they got questions or just wanting to reach out for whatever reason, is that the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah,
Is there an email?
You can hit us up, through the webpage or at ffcraftsmanship.com or at gmail.com, ffcraftsmanship at gmail.com, or I think all of our socials are at ffcraftsmanship. So Instagram, Facebook, and we're just kind of playing with Twitter. So a lot, right? Just trying to keep it within realms. We also send out we've been a little bit bad with this whole master's degree program, but we try to send out roughly a weekly training email. So that's going to start up again here. That'll have everything from brain performance, mental fitness, basic skills training. It'll be some good stuff once a week-ish in your inbox. So it won't be a bunch of spam. It'll be like usable, simple resources for you.
Good. I am on that and definitely have gotten a lot from you, over time for that. So I will definitely put all of that in the show notes. But just to recap again, like I said, I'll have the links in it. But the classes, the place that Kevin brought up is emergencyresponderacademy.com. His website, if you want to go in and sign up for the email list that he just talked about, is firefightercraftsmanship.com. And the free resource that he is putting out for basically for you out there listeners and to help you with the notes for what we talked about is firefightercraftsmanship.com/crew. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
CREW. Perfect. So man, I appreciate your time. I'm really I've got a lot to look through. I think this is probably the most notes I've ever taken while hosting a podcast. So it's good stuff. You did a great job. You said this was your first time to be on a podcast. So I'm glad that we got to knock that one out. I'm sure there'll be lots of other opportunities. You've got a great message. So thank you and look forward to what's in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. Everybody stay smart out there.
You bet. Until next time, thank you for your time and your attention. Like always, stay humble and do work.